Welcome to the second episode of the Gaming Lariat podcast, and today we're going through the Gaming Lariat's top five Final Fantasy games. And I'm here, as always, with Jonathan Ridgway, who is across the pond. And how are you doing today?
It's very early in the morning, so we'll see if I'm still awake by the end of this. Fingers crossed.
Yes. And, well, yeah, and I guess there really doesn't need to be too much introduction for the Final Fantasy series. For anyone who's an RPG fan, you have probably heard of or at least played one Final Fantasy game, if not multiple. So it is one of the best selling franchises out there, one of the most known. And yeah, we decided that we were going to pick our best five and have a little chat about them. And all right, so should we get started, or do you have anything that you wanted to add to that?
I wanted to add that picking five was damn near impossible. Also, this is not my five or your five, it's kind of like an agreed five, so I think this five would be different if we were picking them individually. So it's kind of a bit of a collective. Um, I mean, I could sit here and do honourable mentions, but then that kind of ruins the list, right? So I guess we'll just get cracking and then face the abuse afterwards.
We're not expecting any abuse because the internet would never do such a thing to us. So yeah, I guess we can start off from five, and for the fifth one that we decided was the Final Fantasy X, which which was a game that I remember playing soon after it was released, and it was a big change in the Final Fantasy series. It was one of a big change in gaming in general with all the voice dialogue, and I just remember playing it and was like, wow, this is different from all the other ones in the series that I've played. And what were some of your reactions to Final Fantasy X and its legacy and how it changed the franchise?
Well, it's kind of Final Fantasy X was to Final Fantasy what Resident Evil 4 was to Resident Evil, where it really changed the sort of structure of the story and the way that you explore the world. Because Final Fantasy X removed the world map, the traditional world map anyway, where you kind of explore as a tiny character, almost like you're on a little sort of play set or something, and then you go into an environment. It was kind of all just to scale from the get go, and it was a bit more linear because of that. It was a bit not quite as much of a corridor as Final Fantasy 13 was, but you could certainly see the blueprint for 13 in 10, whilst it still allowed you to explore and go back and forth and revisit the world rather than it be a kind of linear chapter style thing. But it was a really big step up visually from the PlayStation 1 Final Fantasies. It was voice acted for a start. It was just a massive step up when I remember playing it. It was a traditional turn-based combat system as well, so it wasn't active time-based like the earlier ones, or the more, I guess, like what the previous, I want to say five maybe, 5 or 6 were that kind of active turn-based style, active time-based style, sorry, where there's a gauge filling up, and when that gauge fills up, then you can use the turn of that character. This one was a traditional turn-based RPG, and you had your characters' profiles on the right side, so you could see who was coming up next and everything else. But yeah, I mean, I really enjoyed the story. I felt that there were some parts, that some of the reveals, some of the twists, some of the moments in the game were great. I felt it. I think that Final Fantasy X has one of the best endings of all the Final Fantasies. A very like bittersweet ending, which I appreciated, rather than a happy ending, if you want to call it that. Not that most of the Final Fantasies give you a happy ending, but you know what I mean. It's not common what happens to the protagonist at the end of 10. You know, like that's not a typical thing. So I thought that was really well done. And I think it's got a decent pace. I like the way it's narrated from Tidus's point of view, because the intro scene, the first scene that you see, is them at that campfire outside Xanacan before they go in, and then basically you start the game then, and it's kind of a flashback, and Yeates is narrating over what's happening all up until you get to that campfire scene, which I thought was really cool, and he has a few little moments there that are good. I think there's some really cool sort of social commentary as well on religion, on prejudice. Really, you look at the character Waka and his view on Albert, and how his beliefs have warped his viewpoints and stuff like that. I thought that was really, really cool. I'd say cool, but like I enjoyed the complexity to the character there, and that being a part of the narrative is what I mean to say. I'm not saying it's cool to be prejudiced to people, but yeah, I think it's a great game personally, and it holds up quite well. I think I thought the HD remaster held up quite well. Thankfully, they introduced the being able to skip cutscenes, because I think that was probably the biggest bone of contention when I originally played the game. There were a few fights in there. I want to say slight. Well, I guess it's spoilers, but there's a fight when you fight Maester Seymour in it's one of the temples, the later ones, and the cutscene before you. Oh yeah, that's it. You discovered that he's the one who killed. Again, spoilers. He's the one who killed his own father, and you confront him about it. And that cutscene when you do that is so long, and then you have to fight him, and you have to fight his summon, Anima, I think his name is.
Yeah, Anima.
But that is not an. At least for me, back then when I first played it, it's not an easy fight. And when you're playing the original PS2 version, where you can't skip that cutscene, you got to sit there through it again, over and over again, as you're trying to beat this bastard. There's some moments like that, but thankfully in the HD remaster they added cutscenes that are skippable. So yeah, I think it's held up quite well. I think you can play it now, having not played it before, and enjoy it, and it not feel too dated. Because you know, some 3D games, especially the PS2 era, they can feel quite dated. But this one I think holds up quite well. I don't know, what are your thoughts? Why have you decided to put it, or agree to it being fifth, if you want to call it that?
Yep. And we're not going to have very many spoilers about anything here, so don't worry about that. Anyone listening, and I just, well, Final Fantasy X, I do think for its significance is one of the reasons that I do think it has its place, because it did change a lot of things, and it was the voice acting. I mean, before you were reading hundreds of thousands of lines of dialogue if you played any of the other Final Fantasies, and that it does make a difference when you have it all voice acted. Some of the more emotion, you're not having to fill it in with your imagination. You're seeing it and hearing it, and I think that's important. And I do think there's a lot of commentary that it's not exactly beaten over your head about religion there, and the temples and the hymns and all of that kind of stuff, and how it plays into the world. And I think it was done in a light enough touch to not upset anyone. But I do think it's definitely there, especially when you do look at the Waka character and some of his thoughts, and how you also look at Rika and some of the Albad's thoughts of certain things as well. So some of that stuff was tied in extremely well, I thought. And I do think that the cast of characters, I think there's a good blend of different personalities there that make it fun. And I'm a huge fan of Blitzball. Like, I wish that was his own standalone game. Like that part, I loved that introduction and how that played in. And I mean, there were some parts that I wasn't insanely crazy about, and there's a thing I remember as a kid that it took me 2 weeks time, and it always took me an hour long plus into the battle to get defeated when I was fighting Unalaska, which isn't a really big spoiler. Only I didn't say when or where, but that battle just gave me all kinds of problems, and I'll never forget that. And because of this game, I just remember that as being utterly annoying to having to try to fight her like 15 times and losing probably near the very end each time. But man, it's got a serious tone to it, like a very serious tone to it. I do enjoy that. It's completely different from 10-2 for reasons that do make sense narrative wise, but 10-2 kind of takes it over the top. So I mean, like, yeah, that's kind of why my thoughts about it. It is done extremely well. There are some really good things about it, and there's some things that I would have probably have like changed a little bit. Um, I know some people I've read throughout the years, some people don't really like Titus very much. I don't know why, but they just don't. But I mean, I do think the series, but the game in itself is it definitely belongs up there in the top five for its significance and how it was done and everything. So I mean, yeah, it definitely holds up. I would play. I would definitely have no problems playing it again.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, I guess Tidus, he's a little bratty, or he's a little
Mm,
immature and
mm,
stuff like that. But I mean, also like
mm.
most JRPGs or Final Fantasies or whatever, the main characters are bloody teenagers. What do you
Yeah.
expect? Like, I think the beauty of it is, to be honest, when you look at someone like Yuna, I think the maturity in that character and the strength in that character as well, the emotional, the mental strength that Yuna has, because it's a different kind of strength. You know, typically when you think of strength in someone, you know, you think of the physical strength, but the strength that Yuna has, the weight of the world on her shoulders, and how she overcomes it,
Almost
is
like
is
Orin
really
as
powerful.
well. Like Orin, there's a lot of when you really think about like all the characters kind of around Titus had gone through some ridiculously insane trauma, which I won't spoil by going into what. But I mean, there's so it's like, yeah, I mean, he's not as serious, or I'm trying to be light with what I'm saying, but he's not as serious as a lot of the other characters, and there's reasons for that. That if you haven't played the game and you play it, you'll find out why. So I mean, like, I just never really understood why people kind of like had a go at him for some reason. But I mean, it's a yeah, the tone of the game is serious, and it it is definitely a game that I think holds up, and on maybe one day I will definitely give it another a go and play it again. And should we move on to the fourth game on the list?
Yeah, I also wouldn't stress too much about the spoiler stuff. I'd little
Mm,
warning, but I mean, let's be
mm,
honest, it's top five Final Fantasy games. If
mm.
people are coming into this having not heard or played of them, then I'd be a bit concerned. But yeah.
And there is yeah the fourth game that we decided upon was Final Fantasy VIII, and it is my personal favorite in the series. I just loved a lot of things about it, and it is a wild trip. And one of the most like affectionate things about the game to me is like it starts off like in this school environment, and for some reason, I kind of like that. And I kind of wish it kind of lasted a bit longer, but some people wish it didn't exist at all. But it's just that nice environment where you do this, everything with the seed and the garden and all those play on words there, and your squall, and you go through all of this stuff at the beginning. You go through this exam, and it all starts snowballing into this bigger things, and things just keep going insane and crazy. And one of the things why one of the things about Final Fantasy I would love to see on modern consoles is the Lunar Cry, which happens, and it didn't feel like you got any real justice seeing it on like PlayStation 2. So is this one of those things? But I mean, I can understand why some people wouldn't have it as one of their top Final Fantasy VIII games, but it's a game that I really enjoyed, and I like the Gunblades was a just for some reason I just really like the Gunblade thing, and just how the cast comes together and how everything plays out in the narrative. And what do you think about Final Fantasy VIII?
Well, like Final Fantasy VIII, there's an expression in the UK we call it's like Marmite, and it's used for something where like Marmite, you either love it or you hate it. And I think that Final Fantasy VIII is divisive in that sense. It does many things differently. Um, the world levels up with the characters, so you can't really grind in the traditional sense of leveling up and become stronger because the monsters and the bosses level up with you. So if you actually get to max level, in theory, it's harder than if you stayed at a lower level because the bosses level up with you, their health exponentially increases, The damage they do increases. All this kind of stuff
I
increases.
found that
So
out the hard way 3 times.
yeah, so like if you're someone sitting there grinding your levels, well, unless you're and this is it, right? They have this junction system. So you equip GFs, which is the summons, and then they allow you to customize your attributes depending on what the summons have unlocked. So you can stock magic. So magic is not using MP. You draw magic individually or whatever, and you assign stocked magic to those attribute slots. And that is how you really power your characters up, not in the traditional level 1, level 2, level 3, level 4, level 5 way of the other Final Fantasies, or the majority of the other Final Fantasies. So that was just a real big change, really. For me, that system actually makes it quite replayable. I enjoy. I mean, that system is broken to all hell. Like, let's not beat around the bush. But the broken nature of it is what's fun for me. The fact that you can sort of play cards, get a bunch of T-Rex cards, refine them into Quakes. What is it? Refine them into Dino Bones, the Dino Bones into Quakes, and then you've got 20 Quakes, and then soon enough you've got 99 Quakes, and then you can attach that to your HP, and you've got like 6,000 plus HP before you leave for Ifrit's Cave. Is hilarious to me. So like stuff like that, I think is I find really entertaining about the game. The card game, absolutely adore it. Triple Triad, much more so than Final Fantasy IX's card game Tetramaster. Triple Triad's great. I play it loads in Final Fantasy 14. We've got a card game in a game we're developing right now called Right Life, and it is based on Triple Triad. Oh god, please don't sue me, Square Enix. So I love that game, like the card game, to death. I really enjoy playing it, and I like how trying to unlock all the cards throughout the world, different characters, like Zell's mom has Zell's card, different things like that, trying to discover them all and then refine the cards into items that get you, super powered stuff, super items and everything else is really cool, really fun. I mean, for me it was the story that was just a bit wacky. Like the main story, especially the second half of that story, just goes balls to the wall madness. Maybe the final quarter, to be honest, because Sorceress Ultimecia is so very much in the background that the characters pulling the strings, but they're not. You're not made aware that they're pulling the strings, or even like there's not even some breadcrumbs that they're pulling their strings for such a long time. It feels a little bit out of nowhere that this character's introduced, or what they're trying to achieve is introduced. But I really, really, really enjoy the kind of romance drama of the game. I loved the dream states, the flashbacks to Laguna and Julia and Rain. The tragedy there. The story's tragic, but it's a love story as well, and the overarching piece of music, Eyes on Me, the Love Grows, those pieces that Julia writes and then adds lyrics to, that she sings and plays about Laguna.
Was that the one they used in the commercial?
I would assume so. It's
Yeah.
the main kind of song throughout the game, but there's various different versions of it, and the final version has lyrics, which and it's Julia singing about Laguna. But it's interesting that like Julia's son is am I right in saying? Let me just get my thing is right here. Julia's daughter, is this right? Is Rinoa, and am I getting things right here? And Rain's son is Squall. So like, and they end up being together in the end. So it's kind of like I thought that part of the story was great. The time compression, crazy sorceress woman was all a bit batshit, to put it politely. But I mean, it still is what it is. But I understand why it's Marmite. As I said, the leveling up altogether, the junction system was hit and miss for some people. I think for a lot of people, it was the tedious drawing. It's not so bad in the re-releases where you can ×3 the speed, like in the remasters and stuff like that. But in the original version, sitting there stocking magic from an enemy where at maximum you can draw 9 pieces, you're sitting there for, can be over 10 minutes sometimes or something, just going draw, draw. It's not exactly the most engaging bit of gameplay, is it? So yeah, I can understand that kind of stuff. But I mean, I enjoy playing it. I probably replay it every 3 years, maybe something like that. Yeah, I think it was about 2-3 years ago that I replayed it when the remaster came out. Replayed it all the way, completed everything. It was a lot of fun. So yeah, that's where it is on my list, 4th.
Yeah, it's a game I enjoy, and some of the twists that you come across are definitely interesting. And I mean, it's a game I hope they decide to remake one day. I'm not sure if that's ever going to happen, but that's something I'm pulling for. And in the third place, we have the little tie away from the main series in Final Fantasy Tactics, where Ivalice was introduced. And the first thing for that game that stands out to me is just its difficulty. It is so hard, but it's a game that I thoroughly enjoy, and it's different from the main series. You have the grid and you're fighting, and there's all that kind of stuff. It's a lot more tactical, and it is a very, talk about a kind of like a dark, serious tone, and it definitely has that. And I believe is it the only Final Fantasy game that has versions of permadeath? I believe it is. Um, and that to me gives it a lot of weight, because if I remember correctly, almost every character can be permagone at a certain point. And that definitely, as someone who I enjoy permadeath games, and I try my best to act as if I actually care if everyone stays alive, and I try to play that way, and that makes the games infinitely harder, and everything you do has more impact on it. And the story, I really enjoy in that game. The combat, I mean, I mean, if you played a game like that before, you're very familiar with it. It's very classical like that. And I mean, to me, it's just a fantastic game that I definitely enjoy, and it is one of the favorite games I've played. And what are your thoughts on the Final Fantasy Tactics?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't played it for a long time, well over 10 years, and because I'm in Europe, the PlayStation 1 Final Fantasy Tactics, which is what this is, wasn't actually released here. So I had to play it on an emulator at a later stage until it did eventually, a version of it came out. Yeah, I thought it was great. I actually played Final Fantasy Tactics Advance first, and then went and played this one after hearing nothing but good things. I think the tactics in general have permadeath, but I think it's just the recruitable ones in the tavern. I can't quite remember. As I said, it's been ages since I played Tactics, but I really liked the kind of political war drama aspect of it. The story gripped me. The combat, obviously, it's got a slower pace to it than your typical Final Fantasy, but it's got more strategy because of that. This kind of grid-based thing. I mean, it was the director of it, if I'm right in saying. The director of it, was he the chap? The director, sorry, Matsuno-san. He was the creator of Ogre Battle, which is a very famous strategy tactical RPG series, and you can tell that Final Fantasy Tactics has drew inspiration from that series. And I say drew inspiration, it's the same guy, so there you go. But I think his mentality behind it was to make like a more accessible one with a stronger emphasis on a story. And yeah, I thought it was great, and I hope we get another Final Fantasy Tactics at some point. I think are we getting one? I'm not 100% sure.
I don't think so. I don't. Well, at least it's not something. I don't believe that's something that's been released as of
Mm.
yet. I know the white. What was it? The White Lion or the? There's. They did some kind of remake that came out, but I don't think it's a brand new title.
Mm.
Um, which would be nice. I mean, I would instantly play that. Even if it came out, I mean, that's something that would make me buy a Switch like almost immediately if it was only on Switch, but it probably wouldn't be. But but yeah, I the political intrigue part of it is also very interesting. I mean, I'm also an author and am writing an entire series that starts off as a political intrigue type of thing in a kind of a medieval setting on a fantasy world. So I mean, it definitely grips me there, and I do think there is a major character that I remember getting permadeath. So I mean, I don't. I think almost everyone besides the character that well, the main protagonist you kind of play, everyone on your squad, um, can be. I'm not exactly sure because I didn't have everyone die. Um, so I mean, it's. I mean, that title is just. I mean, I've heard nothing but great things about it for years. I mean, I played it originally when it came out on PlayStation United States, and it's a great game, and yeah, it's definitely something I would like to see them revisit. And definitely the War of the Lions is what that called. Is that called? I was thinking about. It's something that if they were to revisit the series, that would make me happy. It's a game I would love to play again. And
I
okay,
think it
and
would. I think it would come out quite well in that 2 point. Like what was it? The 2D HD that they're doing on Octopath Traveler and such like. I think it would look quite good if Final Fantasy Tactics had either a remaster remake, however you want to call it, or just a brand new Final Fantasy Tactics game in that style. I think it would be pretty cool. I think there's quite a few stuff though, like that are similar in a similar vein coming from Square Enix. They seem to be going balls to the walls at the moment with their kind of RPG stuff out of Japan. So we might see something with that brand attached to it, which is probably what people are looking forward to. But yeah.
yep, that would definitely make me happy. And next we have Final Fantasy 14 in the second place, which is a very significant, be honest with you, a huge moneymaker for Square Enix. And I'll let you dive into that first, especially from its inception to them kind of blowing up that, then reintroducing it and tying in the former iteration into the new narrative and all of that, because that's a title I know that you are very passionate about.
Well, as passionate, I suppose. I mean, my MMO experience. I mean, I did play Final Fantasy 11 back in the day as well. Um, and then I was even one of the insane ones who played the original Final Fantasy 14 in what disastrous form it came in. And for people that don't know, I'd assume people do know, but like Final Fantasy 14 launched the original game, and it was just awful. And they actually closed that game down and rebuilt this one that currently is on the market from the ground up. And that was rebranded as Final Fantasy 14: A Realm Reborn, but they linked it in with the story. So they had a cataclysmic event happen in the base Final Fantasy 14 that was cancelled or closed. And at the end of when they closed the servers down, a a cinematic played for the players that were playing at the time, and also it was uploaded to the YouTube channel that showed like Bahamut waking from this moon that was, well, I say moon. I'm not getting the terminology correct. I do apologise, but this spear in the sky, right? And he woke up, and then this big destruction happened, and it linked it in with the narrative of the new game that had been built from the ground up that was coming out, which I thought was amazing. I mean, the story of the game's existence is incredible, really, when you think about it like that, where they were just hemorrhaging money, the game was a disaster, and then they decided to cut that off and remake it and have another crack at it, and then knocked it out of the park. Like that in of itself is incredible. To then come back and become the most profitable Final Fantasy of all time, it's sold over 10 million units, and it's subscription based. I think if it doesn't rival World of Warcraft, it might even be have surpassed it at this point. I'm not 100% sure, but it's It's doing incredibly well, which is insane when you think about that its original launch, not in this form, but like the original version, was such a disaster that they managed to repair the brand's name. I guess is like that's just unbelievable, really. But to go on to the game and how great it is, I mean, it's just the ultimate theme park online game, really, online MMORPG, however you want to describe it. Um, Depending on your style of play as a player, it usually it ticks the boxes for you. If you're a casual player who enjoys the mini games, there are a host of them. There's all
Oh
sorts of
yeah,
things to do, from the fishing and crafting to the gold saucer to the chocobo racing cards,
cooking, which I do a lot of.
all sorts of stuff like that. You can, get a house, get an apartment, join a guild or free company as they call it in this. There's art like role playing, all that kind of stuff, and then there's the traditional MMO things, the raids, the what would you call the end game kind of content, the really challenging stuff. And then there's the story, and the story is excellent, and it's designed in a way that if you're someone who's a traditional RPG player like myself who enjoys the story, but I'm not, like, I would not be interested in the typical MMORPG endgame experience. That's fine. I have a great time in FF14. It's designed in a way that appeals to me and my personal play style, but it also isn't designed. It's designed in a way that appeals to others as well, which I think is just an incredible balancing act that they've got right. So yeah, I mean, like that kind of stuff. I don't really. I mean, all I can say really to people that haven't played it because it's an MMORPG or whatever, if you want to consume it as like you would a traditional Final Fantasy game, you can, and you can consume the base game and the first expansion for free. You don't need to. I don't believe you need to even. You don't need to buy it, and you don't need to buy a subscription. You can play up to level 60 and consume the base game and the first expansion free, and then, if you like what you experience, you can grab a subscription or whatever. But man, it's a hell of a ride. I'm actually only playing through Stormblood at the moment, which is the second expansion. I think I'm nearing the end of it, and I've heard nothing but good things about what is to come. Shadowbringers and Endwalker have well, I mean, all the expansions really, but Shadowbringers and Endwalker have received such critical acclaim. I'm really excited to deep dive into those, because I thought Heaven's Ward was amazing. I thought what I've experienced so far of Stormblood has been exceptional. A proper good war story of claiming back your homeland. It's been a good ride. Music's great. The characters are interesting. The antagonists aren't just evil for the sake of being evil. They've got their own motivations. I mean, these are like basics of storytelling, but my god, when you've played so many games, the amount of them that just have such shallow characters or shallow antagonists. But Final Fantasy XIV is just this beautiful wealth of cast of complexity, I guess you could call it, that make the story and the world really interesting. And I think it just does a great job as well with the lore of the world and the world building in general. I could
Yeah,
sit here and sing its praises all day, to be fair, mate. I just think it's a fantastic game, that even if it was offline, I would be having a great time with it. So.
and there's the four expansions are Heaven's Ward, Stormbloods, Shadowbringers, and Endwalker. And what I can say is it's the first MMO that I really played really and got into. And also, if any of the because there was a big event that happened around the start of COVID where a player died, and there was a huge procession within the game of people who I think were from his free company, or I can't remember if it was him or her, but from their free company, and they had a procession within the game, and everyone was polite and about that. If anyone from that was a part of that, to definitely reach out to us because I think one of the biggest things about online games or multiplayer games are sometimes people worry about the community, and rightfully so. If you're a gamer, you've heard about the stories, and I do think that that was one thing I was concerned with playing MMO for the first time, and I can say that playing Final Fantasy 14, it was one of the friendliest communities you could ever imagine, and people actually do. If they're scheduled as role players, they stay in character and ask questions in the game about the game, the stuff that you're doing, and that to me is immersive again as a writer who wants to get into these kind of environments and live in them like that. That's a big thing, and I do think that if you've never played an MMO before or you're worried about what kind of experience you would have, I wouldn't go into this game worrying about that. It is a great experience. Like I remember I think I spent just hours just cooking because there's a place where you can go cook, and or you can tell like you could cook anywhere, but I went to the actual like kitchen type place in the game and just stood there cooking different stuff for a long period of time. I mean, it's a good experience. I haven't played it in a while. I still think I'm on the I think I'm still on the base game. To be honest with you, I don't think I've got to. I haven't purchased any expansions. It's something I do want to do when I have more time because it is a time commitment, but it is definitely fun, and there's a lot of things that you can experience in Final Fantasy 14. And it's just, I mean, if that's gonna be your first online gaming experience, I would definitely suggest that. Or if you've played other games and you're interested in something new, I would dive straight in because for what I've gone through in the storyline so far, it is awesome. And I'm not someone who technically, I've always been kind of turned off by some of the more of the MMO aspects of raids and stuff and having to wait. But this game does make all that kind of stuff worth it. And I mean, there are still some of the whole go pick three apple type quest things that I'm just like, why is this here? But I mean that's a very small critique to make about another just a great experience for a game. So I mean, like it is very enjoyable, and I can't imagine it's what I'm looking at right now. It says that there's 24 million registered players as of October of last year, so that's a gigantic base. So it's going to be around for a while, and yeah, it's definitely worth playing, especially if you love Final Fantasy games and haven't experienced it yet. Did you have anything else you wanted to say about that?
Yeah, I mean, I would talk about the typical MMO quests of that kind of stuff. It does, as you progress through the game, I think the base story does suffer from that. When I say the base story, I mean the original, um, the base version of it without the expansions. But as you play through the story of the expansions, those kind of quests become less prominent. And I think the most important thing here is like the fact like you can progress through the main story without having to do all these pedantic side quests that traditionally you would have needed to do to obtain the level in order to unlock the next main story mission. But because the game's basically 4 expansions in, they just ease the process. People at lower levels get like experience boosts, so you level up quicker. So you don't ever get sort of level gated out of continuing the main story at this point. So you don't need to do all those side quests where it's sort of like go and defeat 3 grasshoppers, go and find this, that, and the other. Yeah, you don't have to do those anymore. They're kind of just like filler quests to get people experience so that they can get to the main story or whatever it was. Like they're kind of like dated, still in there, archaic, still in there from like previous iterations or whatever. But yeah, those are few and far between where I am now in Stormblood, and they were few and far between in Heaven's Ward. In terms of things you have to do, is what I'm saying. Like these are just kind of optional side nonsense. But yeah, and the world, like the environments are so much fun to explore. In Heaven's Ward, you can unlock flying with your mounts. So you've got this verticality then to every zone, right? Because you can fly now, so there's things you can access by going in the air or by descending that you couldn't before. And then Stormblood introduces swimming underwater. So now everything that previously you just went that had like kind of deep water in some form. You can now go deep diving in, and you've got this underwater region to explore and secrets to find. So again, adds another layer of complexity to the exploration, which is good as well. Anyway, we should probably move on to number one, because I'll just talk about Final Fantasy XIV all day, and it's an absolutely huge game. So I'll leave it to people to explore themselves.
Oh, and yeah, for the number one, if you're Final Fantasy connoisseur, you probably know what it is since you haven't heard this one on the list yet. And yet, it is the original Final Fantasy VII, and I just don't know what to. There's so much to say about Final Fantasy VII in itself, but for what it is, the overview of Final Fantasy VII, for on a personal level, to me, it just changed the way I looked at gaming. And I won't go into specific plot points because some people might be trying to experience the remake as it happens without knowing. So it's just there are certain things that happen in the game that, to me, made the game what it became because of I didn't see them coming. It's not a thing that you would normally that I normally experience at that point in time, and I just thought the way it was done and the images, and there's environmental literal terrorism, which you kind of play kind of the environmental terrorist and you kind of kill people, but at first, and it's kind of like, what are we doing here? And I do think there's like a quote that's like, are we doing the right thing because we just did this? And there's this argument over the greater type of good thing, and there's just so many different things going on in this world that are based on like touch on ethics, and then in, like a lot of things go into a different just a different realm with. And it is definitely not what I would say a happy story by any stretch of imagination. There's a lot of things that people would say that are sad, but are things that grip me for stories that give it weight, that give it purpose, that give it like you feel what a character is feeling because it doesn't feel like, oh, it doesn't matter what happens, they're just going to come out of it unscathed. That doesn't exactly happen in Final Fantasy VII, and it's just a masterpiece of a game to me. I mean, most people would know by now their first part of the remake has been released, and more coming. I mean, it's just a great title, and again, it changed the way I looked at gaming. It's like I think Sephiroth is one of the best villains in gaming ever because of just how this some of the stuff he does and how he's presented is the Sephiroth theme that you hear throughout the game, and some of the stuff he does is just eerie. I mean, you just the whole part of walking through Shinra Corp and just bodies everywhere is a thing that I'll never forget in gaming. I was thinking like, wow, this happened, and
That bit's not in the
so it's
remake.
and as like this is just I mean the game is just so yeah it's awesome. It is just I mean like it's just a thing that like it's I mean, if you were ever going to try to make a Final Fantasy movie like that, then they would grow the franchise even more if you would they were given the budget to do so. That would be the only thing. But it's just a game that if you haven't played the original, go play the original because it's definitely worth playing. It is not short. I think it original was 4 discs, 4 or 5 discs, 4 discs, 5 discs.
Three.
It was three.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, it's quite. I mean, it's long, but it's definitely worth it.
It's not. It doesn't feel that. Well, I mean, it might be long if you don't know what you're doing, but it's not that long compared to some of the sort of padded, inflated game times that of some games nowadays. Like I don't know.
Well, I
Maybe.
mean, it's not like a 20-hour game.
Is it not? I can't remember. I think it potentially could be like. I don't. I think it's can be quite comfortably under 50, which sounds hilarious when I say it like that. Anyway, yeah, I mean, I played Final Fantasy VII a ridiculous amount of times growing up. I played it a ridiculous amount of times. Now I'm old. I've played it. No, I will play it a ridiculous amount of times in the future. Yeah, I mean, it was one of the first games where I felt real emotion consuming the story. It kind of.
Oh, it hurt me in places.
Yeah, I think what I really like is every character has such a strong reason to be a part of the group, and they've been hurt by the actions of Shinra in a meaningful way, so you understand why they are in this fight with you. They all have great, well developed sort of story arcs, I guess, character arcs, in the story. Uh, like with Barrett and his hometown, with Red 13 and his dad, with Vincent, with I forget how to pronounce that. I want to say Lucrea, or I think that's how you pronounce her name. Yuffie with the expectations that her father puts on her and all this kind of stuff, and the country of Wutai, or the
That
city of
side quest
Wutai
was
and stuff.
amazing. That was my favorite side thing. Yuffie's, but
Um,
anyway.
yeah, they all have these great, well developed backstory. Well, like they have these moments where their characters come full circle and they learn and develop, and they don't spare any of them. Like, it's not like some of them are just like bit part. Well, maybe Kate Sith. I mean, whatever. But at least Reeve had some meaningful moments, I guess. But yeah, yeah, and I think the materia system was really cool. Like the way you can equip materia and customize it, and the blue materia combines with different other materia, and you can create your own little sort of, like, I want to say, like tactics related to that. I mean, one of the big ones for me was that final attack materia with Phoenix. Was a good way of surviving Emerald Weapons big stomp that could do 9999 or whatever it was. So it would just
I remember that.
automatically kill you, and it's like, well, I've got this final attack with Phoenix. Like you're working together, so that when my characters die, does the Phoenix attack and revive? It's like casting life on your team. I think there is a way to reduce the damage of that, actually, and I was probably messing up. But anyway, there's great complexity in the combat, I think. At least when you're going in blind. I mean, it's always like that, I think, with sort of turn-based RPGs or strategy RPGs. It's like, yeah, if you don't know what you're doing, you have to figure out the strategy yourself. Then there's some good strategy. But if you know what you're doing, then yeah, it feels like, you're just playing checkers or something. But but it was pretty cool. Yeah, and I mean, it's a juggernaut, isn't it? Really, it's iconic. It popularized RPGs, kind of made those mainstream, because before that they were kind of like CRPGs, or they're kind of niche, but Final Fantasy VII kind of blew that out the water, popularized RPGs, popularized JRPGs, and kind of just showed a kind of like gave an early glimpse into what video games can be, and that they can rival other forms of media in terms of storytelling, which was pretty
Yeah,
amazing.
and one of the things I take away from that game is just that is the thing with the story, because it's a pretty deep story, and again it's not a happy story. I mean, and also the themes it touches on with you know despicable corporation doing despicable things that damage the lives of the middle and working class is a theme that you see again. It doesn't exactly beat you over the head with it and how that is relatable in certain parts of the world, but it is definitely there if you're familiar with that. And I think that's a very interesting thing. But it also, again, even the characters you play, they make some ethical decisions that are kind of like, so it's like I mean, it's a very deep and complex. I wouldn't say there are any just one-dimensional characters that are just there to be there. I mean, Kate Sith is a little there, but I mean,
But
I mean,
Reeve
it's
isn't that, and Reeve's the one controlling him, right? And Reeve's working for Shinra. He's one of the heads of one of the people on the board at Shinra. So I don't think Reeve is one dimensional. I think Kate Sith is a somewhat annoying character, personally. But yeah, yeah, and I mean the organization. It's against, like, they're doing things that are harming the environment in the pursuit of power and energy and total control, right? And I mean, it's not too dissimilar. It feels a bit ahead of its time, really, when you think about what's going on now with everything else. And yeah, I thought it was great. I think it holds up. The story holds up anyway. yeah, I'm excited to see where the remake goes.
Yeah, that's I have not yet played the remake, which is something I'm going to have to do soon. Um, I don't know how soon. It's a thing that needs to be done though. And yeah, there are some changes from that there. I am not aware of them yet, but there so I probably won't be reading the comments to this video. So or a podcast more. But yeah, I mean, do you think? I mean, it's like years from like where do you think this Final Fantasy VII this stands as far as importance to video games in general? Because it's got to be up there. I mean, it feels like it's a game that is only going to grow in popularity with as the remakes continue coming out and they stay at a high level and are critically acclaimed. You just think this game is just going to have so much longevity, like even 30 years from now, people will still be thinking of, or wanting to play the original Final Fantasy VII.
I think the fact that it's still released on damn near everything, like the original game is released on everything right now, even like Switch and stuff, is a testament to kind of how impactful it's been. I think its legacy. I mean, you could link like it boosted PlayStation sales, like the original PlayStation One. And there was a big risk with Sony going into the console market against the already established Sega and Nintendo, and it was games like Final Fantasy VII that really helped popularise the PlayStation. So you think of what the PlayStation is now, the juggernaut that it is. It could owe some of its ability to establish itself in the market to games like Final Fantasy VII and obviously others, Gran Turismo, Tomb Raider, Crash Bandicoot and stuff like that. But I think that it might Final Fantasy VII may have played a big part in that, and of course popularising role-playing games into the mainstream is the thing, because there were some great role-playing games that existed, but they were niche. They were a niche market, but this proved. I think it may have been the second best-selling game on the PlayStation 1 or something like that. This proved that this genre of game was a mainstream genre moving forward, and that led to the success of others. Like, I mean, it's distant future, but you look at other big hits like Elder Scrolls now, Elder Scrolls, The Witcher, and whatnot. Like,
Mass Effect kind of stuff.
yeah, well, I mean, that's the thing. Like, I look at Elder Scrolls and The Witcher just because of the sheer number of copies that those games have sold. But the genre that they're in was brought into the mainstream by this video game. So I think that's how influential it has been. Really. So yeah, I think, yeah, as I said, the mere fact that it's on everything still, and its story's being retold again, like the compilation of Final Fantasy. There's that Ever Crisis being made. It's coming out on mobile phones. So you're going to get to experience not just the original Final Fantasy VII in that format, but also the compilation. And look, there's a reason they're doing all that. Like, let's be real.
Making money.
Well, yes, that is one. But you've got to think about this. And I was speaking to you before this. They're releasing a remaster of Crisis Core, and it's called Reunion. And why release Crisis Core again, a remaster of it, when the story of Crisis Core is actually one of the big twists and reveals in the original Final Fantasy VII story? So, what does that tell you about the remake story? That twist is not going to be delivered in the same way, because they're giving you the twist. It's, like they're telling you, play this remastered version that we're releasing on all the latest platforms. Play this remastered version that spoils that twist. They want people to play that, and then they want people to play the compilation, so they want people to know all the story. So they don't want, like, the next one, which is Rebirth. They are more than happy for people to know all what happens in the original 7, the compilation, and everything else. And the question to Final Fantasy 7 fans out there that are listening is why? Why are they happy for that? Not just making money. There you go. You need
And
to
I
play a
guess
remake.
yeah, the only complaint I have about Final Fantasy VII is final boss fight. I absolutely, positively despise and how they ended the game, and that's it.
Really?
That's all I got. That's all I
Why?
got.
What do you despise about it?
Spoiler: it's easy. um, it just happens. Like I just hate that. Like it's like just make it. I mean, make this a thing that is an actual thing rather than just a basic cutscene. Like I just did not like that. But that's literally my only complaint about the game. But that's
It's
it. That's all
interesting because the fight. Well, I mean, there is a boss fight. Whether you think it's difficult or not is a different question, I guess. But there is a proper boss fight where you can die prior to that closing cinematic. You know, the kind of Sephiroth transformation where he's got that kind of like, is it a cloud or whatever? I can't even remember.
yeah.
Now.
Yeah, but that's kind of what it was building up to, and you just didn't get it. Well, you got it, but it wasn't like
Yeah,
you
and
didn't get
you beat that.
to.
You beat that version, and then you do a kind of scripted fight where it's just Cloud and Sephiroth, right? Is that the
Yeah,
fight
yeah,
you're referring to? Well, for
yeah. That,
me, I view the fight before that as the final fight, and this one I've already won, which you have, and you just it's kind of a cinematic piece. It's a narrative piece, isn't it? Where you kind of just press a button. It's basically like, finish him off, and you're
yeah,
doing the
right.
equivalent of what they do in Advent Children, where he goes and hits Sephiroth and sends him on his merry way or whatever. So I I personally don't dislike moments like that in stories, in games, when it makes narrative sense. I don't think you always need to build to the hardest part. I think there can be a part where you've accomplished it, you've defeated the difficult part, and then you can consume the rest of the story with a little bit of interactivity. And I think that's what makes games separate to other forms of media. So I personally kind of liked the scripted nature of that, just that final scene where you are the one who presses the button, hits the Omni Slash, and finishes him off, and then it leads into that final cutscene. Oh yeah, sorry, did I say spoilers? No, I'm joking. But yeah, I don't have a problem with that. I think like some of my criticism would be mostly in the localization of the original. This guy R6, Tifa calling was it Barrett or Cloud a disabled slur as you're going up the stairs in Shinra HQ. Like random bits like that are probably
I
the more.
do not remember that, but all right.
Yeah, I'll send you a screenshot after. You'll be like, oh, okay, Tifa. Didn't know you were quite like that. Well, and she actually isn't, because in the Japanese original translation, she's not saying that. It's something that the localizer inserted into the script, which has not aged well in the original localization. That is. So there's like bits like that are a bit of a mess. But yeah, I don't really have a problem with anything else off the top of my head. I mean, of course, I know the game like the back of my hand in terms of like gameplay and everything. So it's so easy now and so formulaic that it's it's difficult for me to find any form of challenge in it anymore. So I suppose it's hard for me to judge the gameplay anymore.
I haven't played it in years. I mean, if I try to play it again, it would probably be like the first time again. Um, I mean, which I wouldn't mind, but I probably need to play remake first, since I do remember the key points of the story for the. Other than there are some things that are there's like theories of what certain things are in network that I didn't catch the first playthrough that I would look for if I did go back and play it again. But I mean, the story is just amazing, and I mean, if you haven't played it now and you're listening to this, just go play it. It's not expensive, so If you can afford it, go play it. You will not be sorry. And evidently, you can finish the main storyline in 36.5 minutes on average. But if you want to play, if you do all the side quests and all that other stuff, which I count, always get involved in Final Fantasies, it can be 86-ish hours, which sounds about how much hours I probably put into it around about that. And yeah, that's all that we had planned today going through Final Fantasy. And I mean, if you have any suggestions of other franchises that we should look into or other topics, let us know. We'll definitely work on that. But then, and we'll be back probably next week with our next episode. And until then, well, we'll be catching you.